Democrats have made opposition to voter ID laws a centerpiece of their platform, claiming such rules prevent minority voters from casting ballots. For some reason, they're not really clear on why. Well, a new poll by Monmouth University may have them changing their minds. Friends, it's time for Hold the Line.
Later today, the Senate will vote on whether to advance Democrats' transparently partisan plan to tilt every election in America permanently in their favor. By now, the rotten inner workings of this power grab have been thoroughly exposed to the light. We know that it would let Democrats take a red pen to election laws in each of the 50 states, neutering popular precautions like voter ID while legalizing shady practices like ballot harvesting across the board. It's a recipe for undermining confidence in our elections, for remaking our entire system of government to suit the preferences of one far end of the political spectrum.
Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. That was Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell making his case against the so-called For the People Act. Let's dive into this, shall we? Why, first of all, do they have to call it the For the People Act? It's pretty Orwellian. It's pretty clear that they don't really want to give you the details of what it would do. For one thing, it would effectively federalize elections, and it would eliminate voter ID requirements in states for absentee ballots, for mail-in ballots, because that's a racist policy, we are told. The Democrats make it very clear. Joe Biden himself said that it was the Jim Crow 2.0 situation that was playing out with Republican states wanting to actually have voter ID laws in place. This is crazy. I mean, this is the kind of reckless exaggeration that you would think everybody could see for what it is, but for Democrats, the demagoguery pays dividends. Is voter ID racist? Well, first of all, is it legal? We'll start with that. We know the Supreme Court has ruled on this already, and voter ID in and of itself is not a violation of law, the Constitution, or equal protection. Why do Democrats oppose it so much, though? Remember, it's one thing to say it's not illegal. It's another thing to say, well, we shouldn't have it. It's fascinating because if you listen to the pundit class, the left-wing activists, MSNBC hosts, New York Times writers, etc., you would think that everybody opposes voter ID and that the For the People Act, which is so essential for our democracy, would get rid of lots of voter ID requirements. Here's how the public actually feels, according to this new Monmouth University poll. 80% support voter ID. 80%. Only 18% oppose. And then when you break this down on partisan lines, even more interesting in many ways, support for voter ID by party, 91% of Republicans, 87% of independents, and 68% of Democrats. So essentially, almost everybody who is a Republican or a Democrat, I mean, for all intents and purposes, you can see here, it's roughly, almost an average of 90%. Okay, almost an average of 89 or 88.5%, but it's pretty close to being 9 out of 10 people who are Republican or independent say, yeah, voter ID. And even 68% of Democrats. So an enormous majority of the American people says, yeah, voter ID, but I thought voter ID was racist. In fact, here's Chuck Schumer trying to, once again, play the race card against Republicans on this issue.
Republican legislatures are making it easier to own a gun than to vote. Republican legislatures are making it harder to vote early, harder to vote by mail, harder to vote after work. They're making it a crime to give food or water to voters waiting in long lines. They're trying to make it harder for black churchgoers to vote on Sunday. And they're actually making it easier for unelected judges and partisan election boards to overturn the results of an election, opening the door for some demagogue, a Trumpian-type demagogue, maybe he himself, to try and subvert our elections in the very same way that Trump tried to do it in 2020.
Subverting elections, right. If you believe in voter ID, which 80% of the American people do, does that mean that you don't believe in our democracy? Is that what it seems to be the Democrat elite's talking point on this, which just flies in the face of reality and is frankly absurd. But you'll notice that this is a commonplace thing for Democrats to say on this issue. I mean, they are all singing from the same sheet of music against voter ID laws, and you have to wonder why that is. Here is Jen Psaki, for example, telling everybody that this is just about trying to put in place basic voter integrity measures that, I mean, not even just in the U.S. You know, France got rid of mail-in ballots because they were worried about the opportunity for fraud and the difficulty with really having chain of custody for ballots and understanding that no one's cheating and that the public perception is that this is an election that's on the up and up. But anyway, fine, that's Europe. We can say who cares. But, you know, there are other people that aren't in the American political context who recognize the risks of mail-in ballots and the risks of an absence of voter ID, which of course is tied directly into mail-in ballots, because if you can just get it without having to show ID, voter ID is nullified in those cases. Well, here's Jen Psaki wants everyone to know that, well, this is really just about Republicans being unwilling to accept the results of the election.
State legislatures, as you referenced, across the country are passing a wave of anti-voter laws based on the same repeatedly disproven lies that led to an assault on our nation's capital. They are putting these laws in place because they did not like the outcome, and they've continued to perpetuate a lie about the outcome of the election. That's why we're here.
Let's understand that it was actually Democrats who changed a lot of election procedures in 2020 using the pandemic as an excuse for it. Oh, it's too dangerous, so we got to expand mail-in voting, we got to expand early voting, all these things. So they're the ones that change things. And now Republicans will say, hold on a second, we need to address this and deal with this so that there is integrity in the election process, so that people can believe that this is the way it's supposed to happen. They're the problem, you see. They're the ones that we're supposed to believe have caused the issue. This is what Psaki and the other mouthpieces from this White House do all the time. And I have to note that unless we push back on it, they'll continue to get away with it because they're also upset about something. And this could get lost easily in the headlines. They're upset because it looks like they're not now. The Democrats in the Senate are not going to get rid of the filibuster. Now, they talk about supporting our institutions and the balance of powers and all these things when they're out of power. But on this point, on this issue, you'd have to say, hold on a second. Weren't they all in favor of maintaining the filibuster just a few years ago? Well, here's Senator Stabenow saying, I mean, we got to get rid of the filibuster now because, you know, we would have a majority technically.
My calculus has changed. I came to the Senate 20 years ago. I had a different view at that time, similar to our senator from Arizona, and the world has completely flipped upside down. We now have a perversion of the rules. We have tyranny of the minority, really. And I think Alexander Hamilton is probably rolling over in his grave because the fundamental debate in our Constitution was about majority rule.
Majority rule. Sure. Now that Democrats are in charge, it's all about majority rule. It's all about making sure that they can get whatever they want. Senator Tom Cotton has a slightly different perspective on the obvious hypocrisy at work here. Here's what he says.
So then you have a lot of Democrats who are complaining that the Senate rules and customs, the filibuster, has to go. They say that it's a racist relic of the Jim Crow era. I will acknowledge that some Democrats over the years used the filibuster to block civil rights progress. But I will also remind my Democratic colleagues that, yes, they used the filibuster hundreds of times in the last administration.
All right, after the break, more on this and the possible emergence of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as the 2024 Republican frontrunner with Mercedes Schlapp of the American Conservative Union. That's next. We're living in very uncertain times, and being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed the world we live in today is anything but predictable. The government is passing massive spending bills. The Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars in fiat currency, and many experts are predicting inflation could run rampant in the coming months. That could spell disaster for the dollars in your bank account. We could all benefit from something a little more reliable right about now. Well, what could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver that you can actually hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group right now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now at 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Call them right now at 833-600-GOLD. One more time, that's 833-600-GOLD. Democrats continue their fight against states who have enacted common sense election reform, despite the fact that measures like voter ID remain popular among a vast majority of Americans, including minorities. According to Monmouth University, 84% of non-white respondents support requiring photo ID to vote. So why are Democrats so out of step on this issue? Or are they just being dishonest? Joining me now, the former White House Director of Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp. Mercedes, good to see you.
Well, you were going to call me chairwoman. I don't know. I don't know if I can take over Matt Schlapp's responsibilities over at the American Conservative Union.
Well, I feel like when Chairman Schlapp isn't around, right? Aren't you the de facto chairman, kind of? Aren't you running things behind the scenes? But Mercedes, tell me first what you...
At the Schlapp household, I'm definitely the chairwoman. There's no question about that.
Good to know and not a surprise. Tell me this. What do you make of all the hysteria from Democrats around specifically the voter ID issue, especially given this recent polling that shows that, I mean, if this were a normal political issue, you'd say this is a slam dunk. It's so obvious. A huge majority of the American people support voter ID. So why do Democrats act like it's awful and racist?
Well, you know the reason for this, Buck. It's because the Democrats are so focused on the one-party control. This is a power grab by the Democrats. They feel that it is necessary to move our election system into the hands of the federal government and not the state. And so they're using every possible excuse, even the woke corporations, to make sure that these laws in states like Georgia and Florida and Texas, that they don't get passed, which we've seen success already happening in several of these states. The bigger question we have right now is what's happening in Congress, where you have Majority Leader Chuck Schumer trying to do whatever he can to push S1 for the people, which we know would be disastrous for our election system, getting rid of the voting IDs, pushing for ballot harvesting, and also making sure that you can't even update your election file 6 months before an election. You know how many people are moving these days, Buck? They're moving to Florida and Texas, and yet they're not going to allow you to update your election files 6 months prior to an election.
Do you think that we can count on some of these Democrat senators like Sinema and Manchin, who have said that they're not going to go along with the removal of the filibuster, which, right, with the filibuster in place, they can't get the For the People Act, so-called For the People Act, through. Do you think that there's going to be enough pressure, perhaps, to get one or perhaps both even of those Democrat senators to change their tune?
Well, we've already seen President Biden. He has met with Sinema. He's met with Manchin. They are going to put pressure on these Democrat senators. Hopefully they will not budge. Obviously, I think that you see the people of Arizona and the people of West Virginia keeping a close eye on what's happening with these two senators, because we recognize what can happen. You lose the filibuster, you lose the country in essence, because then it's ensuring that the Democrats will do everything they can to control these elections. We've seen several of these Democrat lawmakers, you know, it's a slip of the tongue. They've said it. They literally have said, in order to win in 2022, we have to pass S1. So they're already telling us exactly what their intentions are. And we need to ensure that we preserve these important rules like the filibuster, because it's the only way that you can ensure that the two parties can work together. The goal of the Democrats is to shut down the Republicans, and you can't push such an important bill like making these changes to our election system if it's just one party supporting it.
I want to switch gears with you for a second, Mercedes. You know, there was that Western Conservative Summit straw poll that put Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump, and I pushed out here you go. The Ron DeSantis vote for all candidates you approve of for president 2024. 74%. Now, Trump was at 71%, but DeSantis ahead of him a little bit. I did a highly unscientific, pushed out a highly unscientific Twitter poll yesterday. And we had tens of thousands of people vote in it, and sure enough, Donald Trump came out in that Ron DeSantis came out by a clear majority in that one. What do you think the chances are here of this DeSantis momentum continuing on all the way to where he's the guy?
Oh, I thought you were going to be in the top of the poll, Buck Sexton. I didn't think it was going to be DeSantis. I don't know what you're talking about.
Give me some time, Mercedes. I'm just barely old enough now, so I'll be able to run for president for the first time. It's exciting.
Good. We'll start the pack. But look, DeSantis, obviously, he's the one to watch right now. I think you're watching that he has been able to be very effective as a governor, stand up against the liberal media, stand up against the Democrats, and really be Trump without being Trump. And so, I think you're going to find that there is a huge loyalty to President Trump. You've seen Mark Meadows come out and say, well, if President Trump runs, Ron DeSantis has said he's not going to run. And so that's going to be the big question. What will Donald Trump do? And in essence, that will determine what many of these candidates, like potential candidates, like a Ron DeSantis, like a Mike Pompeo, what are they going to decide to do if President Trump goes in? And what we've been hearing, at least on the ground, is that they are not inclined to run against President Trump. So you're going to have still those people who are strongly loyal to President Trump, but I have heard some folks that are saying, well, you know what? I would be happy with Ron DeSantis running for 2024.
Do you think that Trump's going to run, Mercedes? Got to ask you, you were his director of strategic comms at the White House.
Look, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's too early to tell. I think he's going to try to, play an effective and important role in these midterm elections. That's going to be his goal. I think it's going to be interesting to see if it's Kamala versus Biden, meaning is it going to be Kamala who's going to be running for president in 2024? Is Biden out of the picture? I think those are all factors that we need to think about. What I'm hearing on the ground is that he obviously is very interested in running, but we have to give it some time. He has time to make that decision. And I think he will look at poll numbers. I think he will see how he's feeling from a health perspective. He will get the input of his family, and then we will see what President Trump decides.
Mercedes, always good to see you. And we know you are the chairman of the Schlepp household, so we could add that to your official title.
I love it. That's great.
Thanks so much. Residents of New York City head to the polls today to cast their ballots in the mayoral primary. After the break, we'll speak to New York City Council member Joe Borelli about the state of the race, the rise in violence in the big city. Stay right there. We'll get to it. I've been telling you for a while now about online thieves who can easily steal your home's title. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take it from this thief who stole over 150 homes and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is why you need Home Title Lock.
Nobody thinks that I can take their house and borrow against the house. Oh, no, I have title insurance for that. No, it's in my name, or he would have to get some special document. They would call me. Nobody's calling you. After I've stolen the title, borrowed against it, or sold the property, or done whatever I've done with it, it's 60 to 90 days to even figure out that they're the victim of this crime. By that point, you start getting foreclosure notices, and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house. Not only that, you don't even own your home anymore. It's not even in your name.
Hard enough? Don't let this crime happen to you. Go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim, and enter radio for 30 free days of protection. That's code radio at HomeTitleLock.com. Crime and violence has forced its way right into the heart of the Big Apple's primary race for mayor, as New Yorkers headed to the polls today to vote. The latest in a string of disturbing attacks was caught on camera in the Big Apple. A campaign volunteer who was working for Democrat Eric Adams was stabbed in broad daylight in the Bronx. This was just one of many recent violent attacks that have happened across the city, been caught on camera. People are understandably very concerned. Let's talk about this mayor's race primary here and also the crime wave in NYC with New York City Council member Joe Borelli. Joe, good to see you.
Buck, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, let's take a quick look at these numbers. Just this past week, nearly every crime category was up from 2020 compared to this year, and the numbers are pretty startling. Homicides up 13%, shootings up 64%, hate crimes up 116%. How big of an issue overall in this election is it just fair to say that crime is far and away the biggest issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's no escaping the fact that crime has become, the foremost issue in the race for mayor. And when you look at those numbers, you have to remember that the 2020 numbers were actually much larger than the 2019 numbers. 2019 was a very safe and very, pleasant year to be a resident of New York City. And in 18 months total, we've seen the city descend into utter chaos, mostly from the prevalence of violent crimes, gun crimes, and the prevalence of sort of the petty crimes that have once plagued New York City at an astounding rate. It's all coming back, and people are sick of it, and that's why it's impacting the mayor's race.
Now, there are some candidates here who don't support the defund the police movement. Eric Adams, a former NYPD captain himself, he doesn't want to defund the police. In fact, he looks like he may be willing to help police, but more of them on the street, bring back the plainclothes unit. That got disbanded. Andrew Yang does not support defunding. Catherine Garcia does not support defunding. Maya Wiley, $1 billion per year decrease in the NYPD budget. What do you make of this? I mean, is there a realistic possibility that Maya Wiley, a defund the police, AOC-backed radical leftist, could actually become the mayor of New York, given the crime that's surging?
Yeah, I mean, you said the operative word, AOC-backed radical leftist that has all the makings of a great candidate for New York City mayor. But the interesting thing is when you look at those three candidates, the three that have surged towards the front of the pack in the recent weeks were the three that had more rational approaches to policing. I mean, Eric Adams, we're going to be on this program and others, Buck, a year from now, if Eric Adams, the mayor, criticizing him for a lot of things. But right now, he is talking very rationally about policing. You mentioned restoring the plainclothes units. I mean, call him whatever you want. If he wants to change the name to be a bit more PC, that's fine. But these anti-crime units once got 60% of the illegal guns seized by the NYPD off the streets. 500 cops out of 37,000 were responsible for getting 60% of the illegal guns off of bad people. We had disbanded that. And now we have a gun problem, an illegal gun problem, people shooting each other. And like, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought that when you have, real tough men and women of the NYPD assigned to this task, and then you stop it, gun crime would take off?
It's astonishing that we have to suffer the consequences of what seems to be such an absurd slogan, absurd belief with defund the police. It's happening in New York. It's happening in a lot of cities across the country. And I just want to know if you think that at this stage, it's fair to say that if Eric Adams wins, do you think, and largely because of his position on police and being more supportive of police, do you think that that'll cause some Democrats, not just in New York, but nationwide, to think twice about doubling down on the defund rhetoric?
Yeah, I think it should, and I think it will. Errol Lewis, who some viewers might be familiar with as an anchor on New York One locally and as a contributor on CNN, he had a great piece in today's New York Times about the fight within the black community on policing, because you have these two polar extremes. You have Maya Wiley and people of her ilk who have lied and made victims out of New Yorkers and Americans by explaining to them and convincing them that police police are the ones who bring violence and destruction in our community. Then you have Errol Lewis, the author of the article, whose father was a police officer, who has a much more grounded approach. And he represents that school of thought in the black community where, if you want to reform the police department, that's one thing, right? That's a good thing. But you still need police to fundamentally patrol and keep neighborhoods safe. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And I happen to think that this might be bringing us closer and closer to the death knell of sort of the AOC irrational left that has been so powerful for the past few years.
You mentioned the irrational left, Joe. Here's an example of exactly what we're talking about. On MSNBC, you have a supposed expert guest saying that the reason for the increase in violence is police's fault.
So this rising crime is not the fault of the movement. It's actually the fault of the police. And this has been our point all along. Why should we keep funding systems and institutions that keep rendering themselves ineffective?
So they make it so the cops can't do their jobs, and then it's then it's the cops' fault for not being able to do their jobs as effectively when BLM and the Democrat radical left are the reason that they couldn't do their jobs.
I mean, that woman sounds like a crazy, irrational person. I hope her employer is somewhere watching this. I suspect her employer probably supports it. But, I mean, if you defunded the Parks Department, the grass would grow higher. If you defund the police, you're going to have less police resources to implement policies that seemingly go towards doing the goal of the police department, which is reducing crime. It's just so plainly obvious. Then you have to factor in how New York's political class has just given up on law enforcement. Today, we had the DA of Manhattan, Cy Vance, come out and say he's squashing every charge against all the looters and rioters from last summer's protest, which, by the way, is the same week the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board also announced that they're bringing charges against 39 officers who they say acted inappropriately in the same incident. So if you're a cop right now and you're seeing policymakers against you, people when you arrest them get freed from jail, and then on top of that, you make one mistake, whether innocent or on purpose, you're going to get jammed up and potentially lose your job and civil liability. You start to think it's just not worth it anymore. And I suspect more and more members of the NYPD are going to oblige these Democrats and give them the police department that they seem to want.
Joe Borelli, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for your insights.
You too. Thank you.
New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard is sparking debate as Hubbard prepares to become the first transgender athlete to compete in the Olympic Games. After the break, the First TV's Morgan Zegers joins us to give her perspective on that news story.
This is a historic moment in sport and for the New Zealand team. Laurel Hubbard is now a member of the New Zealand team to Tokyo. She is our first Olympian who has transitioned from male to female.
The Olympics go woke. New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard has defied science and common sense fairness. She is set to become the first openly transgender athlete to compete in the Olympic Games. Hubbard, who was born a man, biologically speaking, a man, will compete in the women's category. So what does this mean for the future of women's Olympic events in general and sports? Here to react, a First TV contributor and a founder of Young Americans Against Socialism, Morgan Zegers. Morgan, always good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
So what is it about this case? I mean, we've seen that there have been a number of instances where women, or rather transgender women, have started to compete against biological women, but it's just that this is the first in the Olympics. Is that why we're getting all the media attention?
I would say so. I think because it's a worldwide event. What's interesting for me, I was an athlete for many years when I was in school, and I was very competitive. That's a little grody. And so I'm interested in why all of a sudden this idea that men and women can be equal in sports and that we can possibly change the body of a male to be able to fairly compete against a woman has become the new norm. Like, if you say anything other than that, you're committing wrongthink. It's another idea of wokeism. But I looked into the science of it because that's what really interests me, right? That's what the left says is the justification for this, that we can and alter testosterone levels and make it fair. But when I looked into this is what's interesting. The International Olympic Committee, their standard is that you have to have 10 nanomoles per liter of testosterone. At level, Buck, 10 nanomoles is actually 5 times the normal amount that's in a biological woman. And so even this standard that they have is completely unfair. And there are women's groups out there and scientists saying that. On top of that, though, what's interesting, not just the testosterone levels, they're saying that only restricting testosterone levels doesn't exactly mitigate the risks and the advantages that biological males have over women, even if they have gone through a small amount of the transition process. So there's just naturally biological situations that you can't prevent, like the size, the muscle abilities of a male body.
Now, what exactly is the criteria? Is it just the testosterone issue? And as you point out, a transgender female, and in this case, Hubbard, this is the situation, can have a whole lot more testosterone than a female would. So there's clearly a biochemical difference that's just being allowed for in this circumstance. But what qualifies an athlete to be officially considered transitioned for the purposes of competition?
So, Buck, that's the problem. The only requirement right now, according to the International Olympic Committee that claims their top priority is ensuring fairness, is that the male transitioning to female has to have a level of 10 nanomoles of testosterone per liter, or I think for over a year. And really restricting it to only testosterone levels does not account for all of the other biological advantages that a male will have. And what's interesting, too, is this athlete that's competing against women, he didn't necessarily transition when he was a lot younger and had the testosterone there when he was building his adult body. Instead, he was a male for most of his life and then transitioned in his later years. And so I think he does have a huge advantage over these women who have grown into the woman's body.
Laurel Hubbard competed 4 years ago and lifted 42 pounds more than the second place finisher. I'm just wondering, is there really any realistic chance that Hubbard is not going to set some kind of a record here, get a gold medal, perhaps even set a world record?
I wouldn't be surprised at all, because I remember back in my days in women's sports, we had PRs, right? I mean, for the 100-meter dash, women were trying to reach one level. I think it was around like 8 seconds, 9 seconds, whereas men were trying to reach something that was multiple seconds shorter than that. And so the difference between what women are able to achieve in terms of sports and in terms of bodily achievements is really just significantly different. And so I don't think this is really fair at all. And what it's showing there, the science is on the side of women in this case. The result is showing that this is a very anti-woman choice solution made by the International Olympic Committee.
Morgan, thanks for joining. Good to hear from you. A competitor in the Miss New Jersey competition blasts Orwellian censorship on college campuses. Beauty and Brains will have the viral video for you in tonight's Quick Hits. Have you ever wanted to invest in real estate, but you didn't have the time to do it on your own, and you didn't want to make rookie mistakes? I felt exactly the same way as you until about a year ago. I've always loved the idea of real estate investment, but I didn't want to get involved in something that was just going to result in a lot of rookie mistakes. That's when I met my friends at Done For You Real Estate. They took all the guesswork out of it for me. They found me an awesome property. They rented it out for me right away. They managed the tenant for me, and now I get a check every month like clockwork. Don't wait another second to see if my buddies at Done For You Real Estate can do for you what they did for me. Visit doneforyoubuck.com to see how it works. Again, every step of the process, from picking the city, the house, getting the loan set up, getting a tenant in place, and a management company to handle the whole thing for you. Just go to doneforyoubuck.com, check it out today, and see what my friends can do for you. That's doneforyoubuck.com to begin your real estate investment journey today. A Miss New Jersey contestant speaks out against campus censorship, and singer Macy Gray has a few ideas about the American flag. We got those stories on tonight's Quick Hits. Let's get right to it. This is a beauty queen named Justine Murray who decided that campus and social media censorship was not for her. She's got a point.
Hi, Justine.
Hello.
What is the most important issue your generation is facing today, and why?
Our generation is experiencing an epidemic of censorship and entitlement. And it's because our professors and our celebrities are teaching students to be narcissists, to believe that any view that differs from their own is an existential threat. And this is what I experienced on my own campus with censorship, to the point where people believe that speech is violence so that they can threaten other people with violence simply because they disagree with them.
Hey, team, let's get her on Hold the Line. Let's have her talk about it. Unfortunately, she lost that beauty pageant, but who cares? She is the person we're talking about now because she had interesting things to say about media, social media censorship and the pressures right now out there. So let's make a note of it. Let's have our friend Justine Murray on the show to talk about how this was received and how she went viral. So there we go. We're doing booking in real time here on HTL. Now we've got something else. This came up today. I was talking about it earlier on radio. Leaked documents from an Iowa school system that show teachers are forced to classify Make America Great Again as a type of racism and white supremacy. When you look at this pyramid, this was amazing. They have overt white supremacy at the top, which is socially unacceptable. Things like burning crosses and lynching and racial slurs. Yes, we all know that those are actual white supremacist things that are are wrong and immoral and evil. But then you look below the covert white supremacy stuff, and it says stuff like, paternalism. It says stuff like celebration of Columbus Day. It says assuming that good intentions are enough. There's a lot of stuff in there. You say, hold on a second. And of course, circled there in red, Make America Great Again is considered, and this is being taught to kids, mind you, covert white supremacy. That's what we're told. That is covert white supremacy. This is why people are pushing back against CRT so strongly now, because the more they see of it, the more they learn about critical race theory instruction in schools, the more they recognize that this stuff is crazy. And it's going to be divisive. It's going to make your children either think more or less of other people based on immutable characteristics. You're either oppressed or the oppressor in this framework. And so it's really important as we see this that we call it out and understand that this is being taught to your children. So we can either, as conservatives, you can either take action against this and try to prevent people from continuing to be brainwashed with all this, or just allow the left to have free reign and to control what your kids think effectively, because they're getting to them at the school age level, not even high school and college so much as it is for grammar school kids. We're seeing a lot of this training. And CRT is a form of, really rooted in Marxist belief and theory, and it's a kind of neo-Marxism, but that's a conversation I suppose we will have actually here on this show another time. And now we have singer Macy Gray. You may recall her. She had a good song, I think it was, maybe 15 years ago or something like that. She was a big deal at the Grammys for a year. Well, now she's calling on Americans to cancel the American flag. I'm serious. Here she goes. President Biden, Madame Harris, and members of Congress, the American flag has been hijacked as code for a specific belief. God bless those believers. They can have it. Like the Confederate, it is tattered, dated, divisive, and incorrect. It no longer represents democracy and freedom. It no longer represents all of us. It's not fair to be forced to honor it. It's time for a new flag. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? Just when you might think, hold on, do they really want to attack some of the most fundamental institutions of this country, some of the aspects of America and all things Americana that we hold in common, that bring us together? They really want to do that? They want to erase it and replace it with something else? A fundamental transformation of some of these foundational aspects of our society? The answer is yes. They actually do want to transform that. And the left believes very strongly that it has an opportunity here to get rid of a lot of things. I mean, first of all, Columbus Day being on here, celebrations of Columbus Day, as you know, they tore down a bunch of those statues a year ago. And it starts with Columbus Day, and then all of a sudden in Columbus statues, it's a whole bunch of different figures from history. There were even Gandhi statues that were torn down, Churchill statues were defaced, a bunch of missionaries and priests from hundreds of years ago. I mean, the left was going nuts with all this stuff. So give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And that is it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields High.